Good morning, boys and girls and parents. I hope that you are doing well and that you've had a good week. I really enjoyed getting to see some of you on Microsoft Teams this week. If you weren't able to join us this week for our class meeting, I hope that you can join us next week on Thursday at 3 o'clock for another meeting on Microsoft Teams. If you had trouble getting logged in, I am happy to help you. Now I'm going to go over the packet for the week of May the 4th. The first story in the packet is called Museums, and that's where we're going to start. Thank you again for all you're doing, for making learning a priority at home, and for supporting your children. I hope that you all are well. Now let's look at our first story. Okay, here is our story, Museums Worlds of Wonder. Before we begin with this story, I'm going to draw some boxes. First in the middle, we're going to write the title of our story, which is Museums. And you can go ahead and do this with me on a piece of paper. And then in this story, we're going to learn about 5 different museums. So I'm going to draw 5 lines, kind of spreading them out, coming off of this box. And on each of those, I'm going to write the name of a different museum that I read about in this story. And then after I read about that museum, I'm going to write some facts that I've learned about it. Okay, let's start reading. Museums are wonderful places. That doesn't just mean terrific places. It means places that fill you with wonder. That surprise and amaze you. It also means places that make you wonder about the world, about nature, about history, about people. Here is a brief tour of 5 museums that are very different from each other, but all of them are full of wonders. Okay, so this is kind of just an introduction that's going to tell us about what we're going to be reading about. Let's see what we need to circle and underline. It says, circle details about the city's museums, past, and its mission. Okay, so that's about the city museum, its past and its mission. Underline details that show recycling is important to the museum. Okay, well, we will find that stuff on the next page in the section about the city museum. So now I'm going to choose one of these lines and I'm going to write City Museum, and I'm going to leave some space underneath for me to write some main points about that museum. Okay, let's read about it. So the City Museum is in St. Louis, Missouri. The first thing you should know about the City Museum of St. Louis is that it is located in an old shoe factory. It's no surprise then that this museum believes in preserving the past and recycling. I'm going to underline that because that tells us what this museum believes in. Making something new out of something old. Oh, I think that part is important too. There's also an amazing playground called Monstro City that's made mostly of recycled materials from the city of St. Louis, including giant metal springs, a castle turret, and the body of a jet plane. Artist Bob Cassilly designed the City Museum as a huge work of art. Take the Enchanted Caves, where shoes once moved on conveyor belts through tunnels. Children now run into petrified dragons and climb spiral staircases. In Art City, you can watch glass blowers at work and make your own work of art too. Then there's the museum inside. The museum, it's called the Museum of Mirth, Mystery, and Mayhem, and it's like an old-fashioned carnival. Finally, let's not forget the World Aquarium, home to more than 10,000 sea creatures, from stingrays to seahorses. Okay, now we need to look for what we need to underline. Let's go back and see. We already underlined about the museum's past and its mission. Now we need to underline details that show recycling is important to the museum. Well, it says Monstrosity, that's made mostly of recycled materials from the city of St. Louis. So this shows us that this whole part of the museum is made out of recycled materials. But that's not the only thing that's made out of recycled materials, right? Basically everything in the museum is made out of recycled materials. So anything that we see here about how they use old materials to make new things could be circled. Now before we move on, let's write a couple details about the City Museum. So the City Museum is made out of recycled objects and it seems like it's designed for kids because they talked about kids playing in different exhibits. And at the end, it also mentioned that there's an aquarium there where you can also look at fish and different types of sea creatures. Okay, now let's look at this question on the bottom of the page. It says, reread lines 10 to 27. Does the City Museum sound like a place you would like to visit? Explain why and cite evidence from the text to support your answer. So this is just your opinion. You need to say why or why not you would want to visit the City Museum, but you also need to provide textual evidence. So give an example from the story of something there that you might want to see or that you don't think you would be interested in if your answer is no. Okay, we're going to turn the page. Now we have a different museum to look at. This is the National Air and Space Museum. I'm going to write this here on my next line. Okay, as we read, we're going to underline the names of exhibits at the National Air and Space Museum, and we're going to circle some of the reasons you would want to visit Sue at the Field Museum. Are you interested in space and flight? Have you ever wondered where the Wright brothers' original airplane is? If so, then the National Air and Space Museum is the place for you. It has the largest collection of aircraft and spacecraft in the world. Begin with the Milestones of Flight exhibit. Here's an exhibit, so I'm going to underline that, the Milestones of Flight exhibit. You'll see the Spirit of St. Louis, the first plane to be flown nonstop across the Atlantic Ocean by a solo pilot. Want some faster flyers? Check out the Aero Comet, the first American jet, and the X-15, which flew 6 times the speed of sound. Upstairs, you'll find the airplane that made it all possible, the Flyer, which Orville and Wilbur Wright first flew in 1903. So Orville and Wilbur Wright were the Wright brothers, and they were the first people to successfully fly an airplane. Next, let your imagination soar into space. This museum is home to Sputnik 1, the first satellite to successfully orbit Earth, and the Apollo 2 command module, which carried the first men to the moon. Here also are replicas of spacecraft that have flown to Mars, Venus, and Jupiter. The Albert Einstein Planetarium lets you feel what it might be like to zoom through the galaxy. The ride simulator takes you on a virtual spacewalk. Finally, there is a real moon rock you can touch that the Apollo 17 astronauts brought back. Okay, there were some other exhibits there that we need to underline. So, they talked about some of the different ships that you could see, or different planes. We could also underline the Albert Einstein Planetarium. Okay, I think that's all for underlining, and then it says circle some of the reasons you would want to visit Sue at the Field Museum. We have not gotten to that yet, so we need to keep reading. Here it is. Our third museum is the Field Museum. I'm going to write that on my next line. but before we write more about the Field Museum, let's write some facts to go with the National Air and Space Museum. So what were some special things that you could see there? Or what was the whole museum about or based on? Well, just like it sounds like, it is about flight. There are a lot of airplanes there from the past. And there was also something cool at the end. Let's see, there's a real moon rock. So I'm going to add that as well because that seems like a cool detail. There's a moon rock. All right, now let's go on to the Field Museum. You could spend days exploring the Field Museum in the city of Chicago. The museum contains more than 20 million items, including mummies, meteorites, and mammals. With so much to see, you might not have time to meet Sue. That would be a mistake. Okay, here's what we're going to have to circle when it talks about Sue. Sue is the largest Tyrannosaurus rex skeleton ever found, as well as the most complete. Sue is 42 feet long with more than 200 bones, real bones, not plaster ones, all except for Sue's second skull. It's a case of two heads being better than one. I'm going to highlight or circle that entire section because that really tells us why people would want to go visit Sue at the museum. It's pretty cool that Tyrannosaurus rex is made out of actual bones. So they're not replica bones that are made out of plaster. They're the real bones. Sue's 5-foot-long skull was so big and heavy that the museum staff had to put it in a glass case by itself. They made a lighter model for the skeleton on display. You can put your nose just inches from Sue's real skull, if you dare. You also can handle models of some of Sue's bones, including a huge tooth and a rib. By the way, Sue was named after Sue Hendrickson, the woman who found her in South Dakota. No one really knows if Sue is male or female. So that's why they have these quotation marks around her, because they can't tell if it's a boy or a girl. Okay, so what can we write about the Field Museum? Well, we can write that Sue is there. We can write that they have mummies and meteorites. I think that that's a good description of the Field Museum. Let's look forward to our fourth museum. This one is the World Forestry Center and Discovery Museum. Going to write that down next. All right, let's get reading. A museum that's about trees, the World Forestry Center's Discovery Museum will make you appreciate forests more than ever before, including forests around the world. On the first floor of the museum, you can explore forests that grow in the Pacific Northwest. You can discover what lives under the forest and then take a ride to explore the treetops. On another ride, you can learn how smoke jumpers fight forest fires. The museum shows the many things that forests provide, such as wood, water, habitat, and clean air. On the second floor, a giant wall map tells about different types of forests worldwide. Then you can see for yourself. Take a train ride to the forests of Siberia and a boat ride to the forest lake in China. Ride a jeep to visit forest animals in South Africa. Look down on the canopy of Brazil's Amazon rainforest. Wow, that sounds like a pretty cool museum. There's lots of things to ride and different things to see, even though it's all about trees. Okay, let's see what we should underline and circle. It says, underline what you can learn about trees at the Discovery Museum. Well, there were a lot of examples there. Let's see. It talked about how you can learn what the forests provide, such as wood, water, habitat, and clean air. That's an important thing about trees. It also will teach you about forests around the world. And you can learn about what lives under the forest or in the forest. Okay, and we're going to circle what you can learn about cowboys at the American Cowboy Museum. That must be our next museum after this. And here it is. I'm going to write it down on my paper. This is the last one. And let's finish up the World Forestry Center and Discovery Museum by writing a couple things we can do there. So we know it's all about trees and forests. And we can learn about the animals that live there. We learn about how forests help the environment. And we also learn about different types of forests as well. All right. Now the last one is the American Cowboy Museum. Taylor Stevenson Ranch near Houston, Texas. Many museums are important for changing old ideas people may have. Through hands-on exhibits, talks, and even horseback riding, the American Cowboy Museum gives the true history of a popular legend. There is a lot we can learn about the American cowboy. For example, did you know that as many as 1/3 of all cowboys were African Americans? Many cowboys were Native Americans, and the first cowboys, or vaqueros, were from Mexico. And of course, cowboys also included women. I'm going to circle this last part because it tells us a lot about cowboys. So we learned that cowboys can be African American, they can be Native Americans, some of them were from Mexico, and some of them were women. The museum is part of the Taylor Stevenson Ranch, which is 150 years old. It has been owned by generations of an African American family. About 50 years ago, the family started the museum to honor the part Native Americans, African Americans, Hispanics, and women played in settling the West. The founders, Molly Stevenson, Jr., and her mother, Molly Stevenson, Sr., are also the first living African Americans in the National Cowgirl Hall of Fame. Wow, so the people who own and run this museum are cowgirls themselves. Okay, so let's write a few things about the American Cowboy Museum. So it is about cowboys, but it's specifically about cowboys who are African American, Native American, Mexican, and who are women. So that's what I'm going to put. Celebrates cowboys who are Mexican, African American, Native American, and women. All right, that's all of the museums. Now let's answer our last short response question for this story. What incorrect idea about cowboys might the founders of the American Cowboy Museum be trying to change? How are they doing that? Use text evidence to support your response. So what do you think that people thought about how cowboys looked or where they were from? You're going to put that there and then give evidence of why you think that people might think that way. Thank you, boys and girls, for listening to this video and going through this story with me. Hopefully you were able to follow along. If you need to, you can always go back and watch something again, and I am happy to answer any questions that you might have. Now let's look at the next story in the packet.